First of all, can everyone hear me? Or do you want me to use a microphone? Am I loud enough? All right. I tend to talk pretty loud. So, so Sarah said, thank you. Thanks for coming. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about airline dispatchers, who we are, what we do, and our organization, the Airline Dispatch Federation, and what we do for the dispatchers. How many of you here have heard of a dispatcher, flight dispatcher? Oh, okay. So most people here know what we do, but we're going to talk a little bit more in detail exactly what we do. So it's kind of what we're going to talk about. What is a flight dispatcher? Okay. How do we flight plan a flight? How do we get an airplane from point A to point B safely? How to get your dispatch license. That's one of the common questions we get from people is, okay, I want to do this. How do I become one? So we'll talk a little bit how to get your certificate and one of the best things about being a dispatcher. What are the benefits of being a dispatcher? So we'll talk a little bit about that and then about ADF and what we do. So I'm going to start you off with a little quiz, okay? And since you all know what dispatchers are, but is this a flight dispatcher? No, it is not. It's an air traffic controller. Air traffic controllers separate airplanes. One of the common questions I get from people, I tell them I'm a flight dispatcher, and the first thing they say, oh, do you work in the tower? No, I don't work in the tower. However, I used to work at the Willis Tower, formerly Sears Tower, in Chicago. So I could answer that question back then. I'd say, yeah, I work at the tower, not at the air traffic control tower. But nowadays, I guess I can't say that anymore. But no, so air traffic controllers separate aircraft. They do their own thing, right? They make sure airplanes don't hit each other. How about this guy? Because that's the next question I get. Oh, are you the guy out on tarmac with the wands? No, I am not that is not a dispatcher. That is someone who works on the ramp, okay? A dispatcher is someone who has a certificate that's issued by the FAA that allows us to, it's called operational control, okay? And operational control, essentially, what that means is we share 50% of the responsibility of the safe operation of an aircraft, okay? We produce the paperwork for the crew. The pilot in command will sign that piece of paper saying it's safe and legal. Our signature on the flight release is 50% responsible. So we need to make sure that it's safe, legal, and efficient, okay? We have the authority as flight dispatchers to cancel a flight or delay a flight if we feel that the flight is not safe. So there's times, especially you get into winter time, there's a massive snowstorm somewhere, the airport can barely keep up. We have the authority to say, you ain't going anywhere until the conditions improve at the airport. And we'll have that discussion with the pilots and make sure that, you know, they're on board and that we have a concurrent agreement. So we all have a certificate that's issued by the FAA.
What happens if disagree?
That happens sometimes. And I will say this, legally it's 50-50. But I feel like the pilots have 51-49. They're the ones flying the aircraft. So, you know, we'll get into those discussions. Ultimately, if they're not comfortable and they don't feel like it's safe, they don't go. So, you're not safe, I'm not safe. I kind of look at it like that. So where did dispatch start? Well, history, back in 1920, companies wanted to start, or the post office wanted to start transporting mail across the country as an efficient way to do things, right? There were no dispatchers, and what happened back in the 20s is accidents would occur, right? There were no weather tools or great weather tools out there, so dispatcher or pilots would get into accidents and so forth, and the airlines actually hired dispatchers in the 1940s, but they weren't licensed or certificated, okay? So they weren't legally held responsible for the safety of the flight. Back in the 50s, I think it was 1953 is when we had the first certificated flight dispatcher. So there's been a lot of change, obviously, throughout the decades, right? I mean, you go back in 1930s and it's one of our dispatchers there, you know, you have multiple phones ringing all at the same time, computers, all that kind of stuff. So, profession has changed, but obviously the rules and the FARs are the same from back in the day. So when we talk about working as a flight dispatcher, I work for United. So at United, I have flights that are worldwide. Okay. On a common desk, you could either be working domestic or you could be working international, usually not at the same time. Although different airlines have different policies and rules on how they manage their workload. So the typical workload of a dispatcher, and again, I can only speak for my airline, but you have about 30 to 35 flight releases that you got to do in an 8-hour shift. Not only do you have to flight plan those flights, but you have to flight follow them once they get in the air. So it's very busy. And when you get into this time of year, especially summertime, thunderstorm, convection season, it's rough. You're trying to keep airplanes safe away from thunderstorms. So it can be busy. And, of those 30 to 35 flights, you could have maybe 20, 25 in the year at the same time. Now, what happens if you have an emergency, right? One of your flights loses an engine or something like that. Well, now that flight becomes a priority. You got to handle that one, and your other 20 in the air, you got to stand by. I'm handling that one flight. Now, there are resources out there that we can utilize to manage that workload, getting chiefs and other dispatchers involved. But essentially, you're responsible for those other flights. So as a dispatcher, your limitations are we work 10-hour days, maximum. That's the FAA limit. We have 8 hours in between shifts and 24 hours off within every 7-day period. Kind of like a pilot, the 1 in 7 or 24 in 7. And of course, we are subject to random drug tests and all that. Different airlines have different rules and unions that have different work rules. I always say that being a dispatcher is the best part-time, full-time job out there because of our work rules in terms of the number of hours we can work a year. But as far as the FAA limitation, that's what we are limited to. Day in the life of a dispatcher, there's days I walk in, the second I walk in, I want to take my head and bash it against the wall. I just look at the weather and I'm like, all right, this is going to be a bad day, or maybe it's not. It just depends on. So I'll come in. I'm a day shifter. I come in at 6 a.m. So I'll take over from the midnight guy, and they've already had released maybe 10 to 15 flights. So now I got to come in. I got to check all their flights that they've released, make sure they're safe, they're legal. Got to look at what the weather's going on out there. That's very important when it comes to flight planning. You want to make sure that none of these flights have been planned into hazardous weather. Now, weather is not static. It moves, right? So if I planned a flight 2 hours ago, right, so that weather is moving, so you got to make sure that our flight plans are not approaching those weather systems. Any of you hear of MELs? Okay, so in the airline world, those are minimum equipment lists. So every aircraft has an MEL list. Those are items that you can defer for maintenance purposes. So maybe there's a system on board the aircraft that isn't working. We got to go through all these MELs, make sure they're safe and legal. The FAA says things are safe, or I should say that they're legal. But as we all know, just because something is legal doesn't always mean it's safe, right? There's two different definitions of that. So we got to make sure, A, am I comfortable with that MEL? Is the crew okay with that MEL? And a lot of times, that's where, to your point earlier, I'm okay with this MEL, but the crew's like, well, again, you're the one flying the airplane. So, have any of you flown into Newark lately? How many of you were delayed? Or San Francisco, or Denver, or pick a city. This time of year, especially in the summertime, there's a lot of planes in the air. We have ground delay programs, reroutes, too much saturation of traffic. Too many planes in the air. When you get a line of weather or some kind of weather that shuts down a runway, shuts down an airport, now you got all these delays. So you got to manage all that. Weight restrictions. That's another thing we got to battle. Our job is to make sure we maximize all that weight on the airplane. If we hold off weight, we're not making money. Then we get yelled at by our managers and saying, hey, why are you holding off weight? So maximizing payload. And that's a plan that you work with the pilots to make sure you can carry all the weight on the aircraft. You don't want to put too much fuel on the airplane enough that's legal and safe, but too much fuel is not always a good thing. Hazardous weather. We don't want to be putting a flight into this. I had a pilot call me once and say, hey, are you trying to kill me? Because they were playing somewhere around there. No, Captain, we're not trying to kill you. We're just trying to get you around the weather, that kind of thing. We also deal with in-flight emergency, medical issues. So if somebody on board the aircraft is having a medical event, we can get doctors on the phone. And those doctors will give guidance to the flight attendants as to how to proceed. Sometimes we have to divert our airplanes if it's a serious enough medical event. So things that we need to constantly be evaluating. So here's an example route. You got a flight from San Francisco to Newark. Typical day, summertime, right? That's the route. These are the kind of things we're looking at. The convective weather outlook using the Weather Prediction Center or Aviation Weather Center, that kind of thing. We're looking to see where are the thunderstorms going to be. Can we avoid it? Turbulence. Yes, we do look at turbulence. Yes, we don't want you bouncing around all over. Sometimes we can't avoid it. It's just fly higher, fly lower, giving the pilots the tools meaning fuel, to be able to get around those, around the turbulence. Icing is another serious thing. Icing can occur in the summer. It does when you get precipitation. So those are things. Obviously, it's more prevalent in wintertime. You don't want to be putting an aircraft into moderate or severe icing. Winds. For those of you who fly westbound in the winter, it takes a lot longer to go westbound than it does going eastbound. Our flight planning system does a very good job of trying to match the winds with our jets. So if you're going west, or east, we're gonna try to get you on the jet stream if we can to get you faster. And if you're going westbound, you might have to take a funky route to go north or south of that jet stream, but it saves flight time even though it's a longer route. So these are all things we need to be thinking about. PIREPs. Any of you heard PIREPs before? These are all pilot reports. Kind of like Waze, how people can say traffic ahead, cop ahead. Well, in the air, we have pilots that will submit turbulence reports, and we, as dispatchers, pass those along to our flight crews. So we'll tell a crew, hey, 30 miles ahead of you, you got moderate turbulence at 36,000 feet or whatever, duck down, go higher, whatever, try to avoid it. And they can take action as to putting on a seatbelt sign or whatnot. So that was the flight planning piece. Now you talk about when the airplane gets off the ground, and that's when our job as a dispatcher really is important, because once you're on the ground, you're safe. Once you get in the air, now we have to follow you, okay? So kind of like I was talking about with the PIREPs, we also have to advise crews of any severe weather, turbulence, volcanic ash. If you're going down to South America, that could be a problem. Mexico City, or even internationally, depending upon where you're going, there's volcanic ash, icing reports. En route, if there was an unexpected thunderstorm somewhere, we'll actually give guidance to the crew and say, hey, you know what, 100 miles ahead of you, there's a thunderstorm. Let's deviate to the north 100 miles to get around that weather, okay? So we'll give them a different route, speed, different altitudes. And then, because you're taking a different route, now you got to think about fuel, because you planned them on a certain route with a certain amount of fuel. If you're deviating from that route, do they have enough fuel to go on a different route? So these are things you need to think about. The dispatcher is the main guy or girl on the ground, okay? We are the eyes and ears of the airline. That's why I tell the pilots, we are the pilots on the ground, basically, all right? So we will be primary contact for all things related to that flight. Not limited to medical, maintenance, and security, but anything else. If there's something going on politically in the world, or they're going to a foreign country and something's happening, we're the ones on the ground telling them, hey, you know what? Turn around. In fact, when Tel Aviv was getting bombed, Israel, this was back last year when we were flying there, I had 2 flights en route going to Tel Aviv. And we had to be like, guess what? You're not going to Tel Aviv. One guy had just taken off out of Newark, so we had sent them back to Newark. There was another one that was somewhere over Turkey. We're like, you know what? Turn around. and go back to, and they had enough fuel to get to Germany, Frankfurt. So we sent them to Frankfurt and got them on the ground safely. So these are things that we have to think about. Okay, where are they, and where's the safest place to send them when they're in the air? Yes, sir. Yeah. CPDLC? It's so internationally, CPDLC is pretty much the standard. Domestically, it's a mix. So CPDLC is kind of like text messaging on the airplane, where pilots can text message with ATC, get routes and all that kind of stuff. Our newer airplanes have all that technology. Some of the older planes don't have CPDLC, so they're using VHF or HF voice or SATCOM to communicate. So it just depends on the type of aircraft and where they are in the world. But yeah, that's a good question. Bottom line here is the buck stops with us. Okay, we have operational control with the flight. If we don't feel it's safe, or if my workload is too saturated where I don't feel it's safe to continue sending planes in the air, I raise my hand and I tell the manager, guess what? We're delaying flights. We're not going anywhere. And then usually they'll say, okay, we'll fix it. Or we'll do something. All right, do it. So that's a duplicate. So challenges that dispatchers face. Forecast. The weather is not perfect. We deal with weather changes all the time. I had a situation last week in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Anyone ever been to Jackson Hole, Wyoming? Okay. It's a high mountainous terrain airport. Forecast there was for variable winds. No, I'm sorry. It was a headwind. So we planned the flight with a 2-knot headwind. We're like, all right, we're going to get all the payload on the aircraft. Everything's going to be great, right? Pilot sends me a message after he gets off the gate. We got a tailwind. We don't have that headwind. I'm like, oh, crap. So I run the numbers for a tailwind, and they're too heavy. They're overweight. So now we got to pull. The aircraft's already fueled at that point, so you can't take fuel off. So now you got to pull weight off the aircraft. Well, you got to either pull passengers, you got to pull bags, right? So it was like 2,500 pounds that we were overweight. So we start pulling weight off the aircraft, and meanwhile, this is departure time, right? Temperature keeps climbing in Jackson Hole. So now you're compounding the issue because it's warmer. The air is less dense. So you say, even though we have a forecast, is it right all the time? No. And you always have to plan the most conservatively. So I see Jackson Hole and I get PTSD. And I'm like, yeah, I don't like dealing with that. Florida in the summertime, you got that summertime convection. As much as you can try to put fuel on those airplanes, as much as you can for holding and whatnot, you're always getting diversions. You do what you can to try to get an airplane from point A to point B without a diversion somewhere. Other things that we need to take into consideration: wet or dry runways. So if you have a wet runway, that's contamination. Contamination leads to worse performance. You may have to hold weight off the aircraft. Depends on where you're going, right? Braking action in the winter time, when you got snow or ice on a runway, yeah, that causes lots of problems. So these are things we have to monitor. Elevation, temperature, high and hot. Denver is a good example. Every day in the summertime, when you hit 80 degrees, it's when you start looking at your flights. All right, what flights are going to be weight restricted today? Last summer, they broke a record in Denver. It was 95 degrees or something. We had to actually suspend the airline out of Denver for a while. It just was so hot. We were not able to get our planes with full load off the ground. Yeah. Palm Springs, that's another one. It was 110 degrees. And we had to pull. We either had a decision. We either delay the flight 8 hours or we pull 80 passengers off the plane. What do we do? So pick your battles there, right? Because we couldn't do both. So, National Weather Service versus private, depending on the airline that you work for. Some have their own forecasters that work in your operation center. At United, we have our own meteorologists on staff. But you always got to compare what is the National Weather Service saying versus what our guys are saying. Compare and try to go with the most conservative and hope for the best, right? And sometimes they're completely conflicting. It's like, all right, what am I going to go with today? Workload is always a challenge. Now, this is my favorite part. Why? I told you all the gloom and doom and what we do. Why should you be a dispatcher? Well, it's rewarding. I love my job. As much as I sit here and tell you things that can happen, it's a great day. I go home after my 8-hour shift and I'm done. I don't have to worry about it. It's done until the next day. No mandatory retirement age. Pilots, you have to be 65 years old. You got to retire. Not necessarily with the dispatcher. You don't have to have an FAA medical. Pilots, obviously, you have to have a medical. We've had pilots that have come to dispatch after they had some sort of unfortunate medical event and now they can't fly anymore. So they kind of naturally come in and become a dispatcher. Pay is very well, depending where you work. It can, some airlines start you out at 6 figures, depending, where you're at. So it's very rewarding pay-wise. And the cost to get your certificate compared to a pilot certificate is a fraction of the price. So if you, to get your 0 to hero as a commercial pilot to ATP, you're talking $50, $60, maybe $70,000, maybe more if you're going to a university or something like that. To get your dispatch license, $5,000, $6,000. That's it. So cost perspective, it's great to get your 6 weeks long. Yes, sir. Ooh, the AI question. Yeah, AI is here. I mean, there's nothing anybody can do about it. So, the thing is, how do you use it as a tool to help you as a dispatcher or in our general jobs, right? We can't avoid it. We can't say go away. Is it going to impact our jobs of the future? To some extent, yes. Will we need 630 dispatchers? Maybe not. But you will always need somebody there to make these decisions that AI can't make. It's very black and white, certain things, and AI will always go with the more restrictive, and you don't always need to do that. So it's a good question, and a lot of unknowns to that answer. Have you had a question over here? Yeah. Yeah.
Or you just walk in and say, hey,
So you,
at this desk and here's your 20
yeah.
from Alaska to
Yeah.
the same day.
So you put a desk, and that desk that you work is like an East Coast desk. So you're working an East Coast bias or a West Coast bias, transcon. So it's not like you have the whole world, on your desk. So it does help you manage the workload a little bit. So, yeah, sir. Right.
Rick, thanks for your question
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Chasing friends for a while.
Yeah.
And one thing that college myself, colleges that are
Yeah.
mutual friend in Dallas, college school, really great.
Yeah. Yeah. We've had probably in the last year or two, probably 2 or 3 dozen people within meteorology. And that translates so well. That is one of the biggest struggle that people have coming into this job who don't have the meteorology background is understanding how to read a weather map. If you have that meteorology background, it really helps you and translates well. So, yeah, it's a lifesaver for these people.
You actually heard.
Oh, good. Well, we'll have to talk about that. Yeah. So I have a passion for meteorology too. So when I got in, I'm like, oh, sweet. Yeah. So good question, because I was just going to get to that. So how do you get your dispatch certificate, right? So you have to go to school. You have to do 200 hours, all right? 200 classroom hours, that's about 6 weeks. At the end of the class, you have to pass 2 tests. You have to have a check ride with the FAA, which is usually a paper and pen flight plan using a good old whiz wheel, and also a aircraft dispatch exam, which is kind of a standard ATP exam. And then you pass an oral and a practical, all right? So think topics that you have to master to get through the class. Meteorology. That's the biggest, I would say probably meteorology is probably close to, if not more than 50%. Okay. Very important that you understand meteorology. Aircraft performance. That is a very weak spot that people who don't have flying background, they struggle through that. I did myself. When I went through dispatch school, whatever hair I had on my head lost, as you can see. It's because you're going through charts and trying to learn all that. You got to learn systems, federal regulations, air traffic control, navigation, communication, human factors. So these are all the things that you're going to be trained on in dispatch school and will be tested on at the end. But of all these, really, these are the big ones. Meteorology, performance, and systems. Those are heavy, heavy hitters that you got to learn when you go through all of that. So that's how you get your dispatch certificate. And now once you get your certificate, great. I've got my certificate. Now what? Now you can apply to work for an airline. Depends on the airline whether they'll take you with no experience. My airline, they want you to have 2 years of experience or an internal employee. So a backdoor to that is get a job at a major airline, throw some bags on the ramp, be a crew scheduler, do something, do your time, usually 1 or 2 years, and then you can transfer in laterally to be a dispatcher with no experience. Otherwise, you go work at a regional, you could go work at SkyWest, Horizon, you pick it, right? And do 2 years, a year and a half to 2 years at a regional, build your time, and then apply at United to become a dispatcher. So a couple ways you could do it. Usually getting the experience is the best way to do it, because then you come in and you'll see how much easier it is when you're dealing with bigger airplanes versus the smaller airplanes. I can actually carry fuel. What? Yeah. So, yeah. It's Troy. Yeah, I missed that one. Oh, and I also forgot the big one too, sitting in the flight deck. Yeah, I got to add that to the slide. Yeah, so working for an airline, you get to travel in the world, anywhere in the world, standby, of course, which can be challenging, but it is a benefit. And then another thing with with being a dispatcher, you do get to sit in the flight deck. It's 5 hours a year that you're required. I say required like it's torture. I love it. But yeah, you get to sit with the pilots and watch and observe and ask questions, or you can go in the simulator in Denver, our simulator here, and ask to do a sim ride, which is really cool. I really stress to people, like for the new people that come in, sit in the flight deck more than just the 5 hours. Ask questions. It's such a great opportunity for you to learn the job and what the pilots go through. So it's a great job. Thank you for reminding me about the travel benefits, because that is a airline dispatch for Federation. I know we're running tight on time here. ADF, we have a booth here. We are basically we're not a labor organization, but we are a trade group for the dispatch profession, and we are here to somewhat represent the dispatchers for career building, for policy and legislation in Congress. With AI stuff that's coming around, we're really trying to make sure that dispatchers are represented, and that the career is going to stick around for a long time. And we do outreach events to make sure people know who dispatchers are, what we do, how we benefit the industry. And, so here's all our members. Got Mike Timpey in the back. He's our secretary. I'm the secretary. Duh. He's the treasurer. Mike. I'm the secretary. And then Mike, Miguel, and Brian is our. And if you want more information, we do have a brand new website. So if you go to dispatcher.org, gives you all the information about how to become a dispatcher, if you want to become a member, and attend our events and so forth. So do we have time for questions, or are we? Okay. All right. And yeah. Oh, hundreds. Yeah. It used to be a fine number, and it's just over the past, 10 years or so, it's just expanded. And no matter where you go, where you live, there's a school out there somewhere. So, all you need to do is if you go on the FAA's website or go on our website and it's linked, you just look at all the FAA Part 65 schools, and it'll tell you a list of all the schools that are out there, and it's updated continuously. So there's a lot out there, and you could do it through a university too. So as part of a degree program through a lot of colleges. So what else? How many people want to be a dispatcher? That's it? Come on. Yeah. 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 It's,
Airline, right?
it depends on the airline you work for, but I don't think there's any airline that makes you retire for a dispatcher. I mean, the FAA doesn't say you have to retire at 65 for a dispatcher. Pilots have to retire at 65 because of the FAA. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, they could just transfer over and boom, they become, their seniority carries over, and they do. They have to go. So the ATP is, they'll have to take a dispatch ATP and basically the check ride, because they've got all the other stuff, and they just, and then they apply. Yeah. Because you got the other ratings. Yeah. That's right. Yes. We have like a pension or what, 401k. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It would be definitely company specific. Depends who you work for, what their rules are. Good questions. All right. Well, if there's nothing else, then thank you for coming. And visit us at our booth. We have swag. We have all sorts of fun stuff to give out. Stress planes, lanyards. But yeah, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.